It's time to shift gears and see the world from a completely different perspective. We bring you high-octane stories and fast-paced narratives that will leave you breathless and wanting more. Click subscribe now and get ready to accelerate your cinematic journey today.
On the morning my son knocked on my front door with 6 duffel bags and a woman I'd never trusted, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled, stepped aside, and said, "Come on in." What Kevin didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd been waiting 12 years to finish what they started. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began, because you can't understand what I did without understanding what was done to me first. My name is Eleanor Grace Matthews. I'm 68 years old. For 39 years, I worked as a nurse practitioner at Mercy Regional Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. I started at 22, pushing a medication cart down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old carpet. And I retired at 61 as head of the cardiac care unit with a staff of 42 people who called me Miss Eleanor even when I told them not to. I'd held the hands of people taking their last breath. I've stayed past midnight with families who had nowhere else to go. I know what it means to fight for someone who can't fight for themselves. I know it better than most. My husband Robert died of a stroke on a Tuesday in March, 11 years ago. We were married 31 years. He was a high school history teacher and the most patient man I have ever known. He made the best cornbread in Columbus and could name every president in order, forward and backward, which he did at every Thanksgiving to the exhaustion of everyone at the table. I loved him completely. When he died, I thought the hardest thing I would ever survive was already behind me. I was wrong about that. Our son Kevin was 31 when Robert died. He'd been living in Cincinnati for 3 years by then, working in sales at a medical supply company. He drove up for the funeral with a woman named Diane, whom he'd been dating for about 8 months. She was 34, blonde, polished in that way that always made me a little uneasy, the kind of polish that takes effort to maintain rather than coming naturally. She wore a black dress to the burial that was just a touch too short, and she kept her hand on Kevin's arm the entire service, not comforting him, but anchoring him, like a flag planted in soil she intended to claim. Kevin and I had always been close before Diane. He called me every Sunday. He visited at Christmas and for my birthday in September. He asked my opinion on things and actually listened. After Diane, the Sunday calls got shorter, then they got less frequent. Then they stopped entirely. By the time a full year had passed since Robert's funeral, Kevin had visited exactly once and left after 2 hours because, he said, Diane wasn't feeling well and needed him home. I remember standing on my porch watching his car pull out of the driveway and thinking that I was losing my son to a woman who had no intention of ever giving him back. I was right about that. The break came 14 months after Robert's death, over money. My husband had a modest life insurance policy, $180,000, not a fortune, but enough to keep me stable while I decided my next steps. Kevin called one evening and said, carefully and with the kind of rehearsed calm that means someone else wrote the script, that he and Diane were thinking about buying a house, that the market was good right now, that it would mean a lot to have family support during a transition like this, that Robert would have wanted to see Kevin settled and secure. He asked me for $75,000. I told him no. I told him I loved him, and I was proud of him and I wanted him to have a beautiful life. That $75,000 was most of what stood between me and financial uncertainty at 60 years old, and I needed it. I told him I would help in other ways. I offered to co-sign a modest loan. I offered to help them find a financial counselor. He told me I was selfish. He told me I had always put myself first. He told me that Robert had worked himself into the ground for that family, and the least I could do was honor that by being generous with what he'd left behind. Then he said something I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count. He said, Diane was right about you. She said you'd do this. I didn't speak to my son again for 12 years. In those 12 years, I did not collapse. I want to be very clear about that because people sometimes assume grief and abandonment hollow a person out. They can, but they didn't hollow me out. I was 60 years old when Kevin walked out of my life, and I decided that if I was going to spend the next chapter alone, I was going to spend it building something that mattered. I retired from Mercy at 61 with a full pension and benefits. I tipped the $180,000 from Robert's policy, and I invested carefully, With the help of a financial advisor named Carol Simmons, who had been my patient's daughter and later became one of my closest friends, I purchased a house in a quiet neighborhood in Dublin, Ohio. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a backyard that backs up to a creek. I paid $310,000 for it in cash. Over the next 7 years, my investments grew. The medical supply industry I'd spent my career adjacent to was something I understood, and Carol helped me put money in the right places at the right times. When I turned 68, my net worth was just over $2.1 million. Not generational wealth, but more than enough. More than the daughter of a factory worker from Dayton, Ohio, ever thought she'd have. I lived alone in my 4-bedroom house, which my friend Paulette from church told me was foolish, and which my therapist told me was perfectly fine. I gardened in the backyard. I volunteered twice a week at a free clinic on the east side. I traveled to Portugal at 64 and to New Orleans every jazz festival. I was not miserable, but some rooms in a house will echo no matter how many plants you put in them. And those rooms reminded me, on certain evenings, that I had a son I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. I learned about Marcus through Paulette, actually. Paulette's daughter followed Kevin on social media and mentioned, offhandedly, that Kevin had a boy, born about 8 years after the estrangement. The child's name was Marcus Robert, my husband's name, and he was 14 years old when Paulette told me. His mother was a woman named Tanya, not Diane. Apparently the marriage to Diane had ended, though no one could tell me exactly when or why. Kevin had remarried. Then it seemed Kevin and his second wife had separated as well, and Kevin had returned to Diane. I settled that information for several weeks. I thought about a boy named Marcus who carried my husband's name and had never met me. I thought about Kevin, who I had loved since the moment he existed, and who had chosen the wrong woman over his mother and paid some unknown price for it. I did not call. I did not reach out. 12 years of silence builds walls that are not easily knocked down, and I had learned not to be the one who always did the knocking. Then, on a Wednesday morning in early October, I opened my front door to find a teenage boy standing on my porch, with a backpack over one shoulder and dried mud on his sneakers. He was tall for his age, with Robert's forehead in Kevin's eyes, and an expression of determined nervousness that made my chest ache. "Are you Eleanor Matthews?" he asked. I said I was. "I'm Marcus," he said. "Kevin Matthews is my dad. I think you're my grandmother." I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I said, "I know who you are, baby. Come inside." Marcus told me things over the next 2 hours that I will not repeat in their entirety, because some of what a child confides should stay private. But the broad shape of it was this. Kevin had lost his second sales job in 3 years. He and Diane, who had re-injured his life 2 years ago after his second marriage fell apart, were living in a rented apartment in Westerville. There was not enough money. Diane had told Kevin about my house in Dublin, about my retirement savings, about the fact that I was 68 and living alone. Marcus, who was smart enough to be frightened by what he understood and brave enough to come warn me anyway, had found my address through an old obituary for Robert that listed me as a surviving spouse. "She talks about you," Marcus said quietly. "Not nice. She says you're sitting on money that should belong to Dad. She says old people get confused and don't even know what they're signing half the time." He looked at his sneakers. "I thought you should know somebody was saying stuff like that about you." I reached over and put my hand over his. "Thank you for coming to me," I said. That took courage. "Are you going to be okay?" he asked. "I'm going to be better than okay," I told him. "But I need you to do something for me. Can you go back home and not mention that you came here? Not to your father. Definitely not to Diane." He nodded. He finished his hot chocolate. Before he left, he paused at the door and said, "My grandpa's name was Robert. Dad named me after him. I never really understood why until today. After he left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Carol. They arrived on a Saturday 12 days after Marcus's visit. Kevin was 43 now, and he looked it in the way that men look their age when life has been unkind to them. Not old, exactly, but worn, like a shoe that's been resoled too many times. He had put on weight and lost some hair, and there was something careful about the way he moved, the way a person moves when they're not sure of their welcome. Behind him was Diane, and she had not changed the way Kevin had changed. She was 50 now, still sharp in that knife-polished way, wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost $400 and carrying a tote bag with a designer logo I recognized. And behind both of them, half hidden, was Marcus, who caught my eye and gave me a small, careful nod. "Mom," Kevin said. His voice broke a little on the word. "I know I don't deserve come in out of the cold," I said. Diane's eyes moved across my entryway immediately, the way eyes do when they're calculating. She touched the wall sconce near the door, looked at the original watercolor above the console table, a sunrise over Lake Erie that I'd bought from a local artist for $800, and said, "Eleanor, your home is just beautiful. Really, you have such a gift for making a space feel warm." "Thank you," I said. "Can I get anyone tea?" I made tea and I listened. Kevin did most of the talking, and his story, as he told it, was about failure and shame and a long road back. The sales jobs that hadn't worked out, the second marriage that had been a mistake from the start, the debt that accumulated. Diane, bless her heart, had stood by him through all of it. They were trying to get back on their feet. They just needed a little time, a little stability, the kind of foundation that only family could provide. I noticed he did not ask to borrow money, not directly, not yet. What he asked was whether they could stay with me. Temporarily, just until things settled. I looked at Marcus, who was sitting at the far end of the table looking at his phone with the studied indifference of a teenager who was actually listening to every word. "Of course," I said. "The guest room is made up. Marcus, there's a room upstairs with a desk if you need to study." Diane's smile was warm and immediate. "Oh, Eleanor, you have no idea what this means to us. We are going to be the best house guests. And honestly, with a house this size, it can't be easy managing everything on your own. Maybe we can help. Take some things off your plate. Kevin is so good with finances, and I actually have a background in healthcare administration." She laughed, a small practiced sound. "So if you ever need help navigating anything medical, benefits, paperwork, any of that, you just say the word." "How thoughtful," I said. That night, Carol came in to the back door at 9 o'clock while Kevin and Diane were watching television in the living room. We sat in my office with the door closed, and I told her what the afternoon had looked like. "She moved fast," Carol said. "She planted the seed in the first 2 hours," I said. "Healthcare administration background. Finances. Managing the house. She's setting up the justification." Carol opened her laptop. I had already given her what Marcus had told me, and she'd been doing research for nearly 2 weeks. She turned the screen toward me. Diane's legal name was Sandra Marie Pruitt. She had changed it to Diane Holloway in 2011. Before that, in 2009, she had been investigated, though not charged, in a case involving a nursing home in Indianapolis where she had worked as a billing coordinator. 3 elderly residents had signed healthcare proxies and financial power of attorney documents that their families later disputed. The case was closed when 2 of the residents died and the third's family settled privately. There was not enough to prosecute, but there was enough to know. In 2014, under the name Diane Holloway, she'd have been involved in a civil suit in Michigan. A 71-year-old widower named Harold Eccles had signed over management of his investment accounts to a financial wellness consultant, who turned out to be Diane, operating through an LLC with no real licensing. He lost $112,000. His daughter filed suit. Diane settled for $38,000 and an EADA. Harold Eccles died 8 months later. His daughter told the internet about it in a post that had been shared 600 times before she deleted it. But Carol had found the cached version. "She's done this at least twice that we can document," Carol said. "And both times the targets were elderly, isolated, and recently widowed. I was not recently widowed. But I was 68 and I lived alone, and I had a son who had been absent for 12 years and had now reappeared with a woman who had done this before. I want everything documented," I said. "Every conversation, every piece of paper they try to put in front of me. And I need to call my attorney." "Already texted her," Carol said. "Janet's available Monday morning." I also had cameras. I'd had them installed 18 months ago. Front porch, back door, kitchen, living room, hallways. A woman living alone makes practical choices. What Kevin and Diane did not know was that every common area of my house was recording with audio and had been since the day they arrived. I reviewed the footage from that first Saturday night at midnight. Kevin was asleep. Diane was not. She was in my kitchen, on her phone, speaking quietly. The audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. The house alone has to be worth 400, maybe more. No, she's sharp, but she's lonely. She lit up when the kid called her grandmother. The healthcare proxy is the cleanest angle. Once she's listed as incompetent, everything routes through Kevin, and Kevin does what I tell him. I already have a contact for the paperwork. Give me 3 weeks. I listened to it twice. Then I saved the file to 2 external drives and emailed it to Janet. The next morning, I made biscuits. The weeks that followed were, from the outside, a picture of family reconciliation. Diane helped me in the kitchen and complimented everything I cooked. Kevin fixed a leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom and seemed genuinely pleased with himself about it. Marcus and I developed a quiet routine. He helped me water the garden after school on the days I drove him. And in exchange, I helped him with a history paper about the civil rights movement that his teacher said was the best she'd received that year. He reminded me of Robert in ways that made me have to turn toward the window sometimes, but underneath the surface, things were moving. Diane began, carefully and gradually, to introduce the idea that I was not managing well. She did it gently, with concern in her voice and her hand on my arm. She mentioned that she had found a bill in the mail that she wasn't sure I'd seen. She mentioned that I seemed tired. She mentioned that it must be so difficult to keep track of everything at my age, which she said with the warmth of someone who absolutely did not mean it as an insult. She also introduced a man named Dr. Gerald Foote. She mentioned him first as an aside, a wonderful geriatric specialist, so compassionate, very helpful for people navigating the transition into their later years. She mentioned him again a week later. Then she suggested, delicately, that it might be a good idea for me to have a comprehensive wellness evaluation. For peace of mind, she could arrange it. She knew Dr. Foote personally. I looked up Dr. Gerald Foote. He had a license in Ohio, valid, no disciplinary record, but his office address was a suite in a building in Westerville that also housed an LLC called Clarity Consulting Group. Clarity Consulting Group was registered to a Sandra M. Pruitt. I told Janet everything. Meanwhile, I let Diane believe she was making progress. I let her see me hesitate over the mail. I let her hear me misremember a date once, on purpose, in a way that was just small enough to seem accidental. I let Kevin believe I was grateful and overwhelmed and ready to lean on family again. And then, 3 weeks after they arrived, Diane told me she had arranged a meeting. Just a casual sit-down, she said. Dr. Foote, Kevin, me, and you. We can talk about your health, your finances, make sure everything is set up in a way that protects you. It's what families do. What a good idea, I said. Let's make it official. Invite whoever you need. I'll invite a few people too. Her expression flickered. Oh, I was thinking something smaller, more intimate. I think I'd feel more comfortable with friends present, I said. It's a big decision. I'd want people I trust there to help me understand what I'm agreeing to. She recovered quickly. Of course. Absolutely. The more the merrier. She thought she was still winning. She had no idea I'd already built the room. The gathering was on a Sunday afternoon. I told Kevin and Diane it was a small get-together with neighbors and church friends, a chance to introduce the families, celebrate being together again. In reality, I had invited 22 people, every one of them chosen deliberately. Carol was there with her husband. Janet, my attorney, arrived early and sat near the front of the living room with a leather portfolio in her lap. Reverend Claudette Morris from my church came with 2 of her deacons. My neighbor Frank, a retired judge, sat with his wife near the window. The director of the free clinic where I volunteered, Dr. Amara Osei, came straight from her shift, still in her hospital badge. And there, in the back corner, was a woman named Rosalind Eccles, Harold Eccles' daughter, who had driven 4 hours from Michigan at my personal request. Dr. Tin, Footy arrived at 2 o'clock with a briefcase and a smile that did not know what was waiting for it. Diane was dressed beautifully. She worked the room with a flute of sparkling water and a warmth that I could see, charming the people who didn't know what she was. Kevin stood near the fireplace looking uncertain. Marcus sat in a chair by the bookshelf, very still, watching everything. I let them have 30 minutes of social time. Then I stood in the center of the room and asked for everyone's attention. I want to thank you all for coming today, I said. I asked you here because I have something I need to share with the people I trust, and I believe in doing difficult things in the light, with witnesses. I've spent my career in medicine, and the one thing 40 years of patient care taught me is that clarity saves lives. So I'm going to be very clear. Diane's smile began to shift. 3 weeks ago, I said. My son Kevin came back into my life after 12 years. I was glad to see him. I love my son. That has never changed. I looked at Kevin. He looked back at me. But Kevin did not come alone. He came with a woman named Diane Holloway, or, as she was born, Sandra Marie Pruitt. The room was very quiet. I nodded to Carol, who pressed a key on her laptop. On the screen behind me, a document appeared. Diane's original birth certificate, followed by the court record of her name change. Sandra, I said, not unkindly, you've done this before. I walked through it the way a nurse presents a chart, clearly without excess emotion, fact by fact. The Indianapolis nursing home. The 3 residents who signed documents their families later contested. The civil suit in Michigan, Harold Eccles, who lost $112,000. Rosalind Eccles, who stood up from her chair in the back of the room without being asked and said, in a voice that was steady and devastating, "My father was 71 years old. He thought she was helping him. He died 8 months after she took everything he had saved." No one in that room moved. I continued. I played 20 seconds of the kitchen recording. Just 20 seconds. Just the part about the healthcare proxy, and she does what I tell him. 20 seconds was enough. Then I put up the information on Dr. Gerald Foote, his license, his office address. The LLC registered to Sandra Pruitt. Doctor and fee. Foote was going to conduct a wellness evaluation on me, I said, the results of which, I suspect, were already written before my appointment. Frank, the retired judge, made a sound that was not quite a word. I am 68 years old, I said. I live alone. I am a black woman who spent 4 decades keeping other people alive, and I built my retirement with my own hands, and I will not apologize for it, and I will not be ashamed of it, and I will not let anyone take it from me. I turned and looked at Sandra, because I would not call her Diane anymore. You came into my home planning to have me declared incompetent so you could drain my accounts before I understood what was happening. You have done this to other people. You were going to do it to me, and you were going to use my son to do it. Sandra was standing now, her face white and rigid. These documents could be fabricated. You have no idea, Janet, I said. My attorney stood. I'm Janet O'Coffer, Ms. Matthews' legal counsel. Every document you've seen today is certified and verified. The recording was made on Ms. Mon, Matthews' own property, using her own security system, which Ohio law fully permits. I have also, as of this morning, filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office regarding Sandra Pruitt's activities in the state, and I've been in contact with the Michigan Attorney General's office regarding the Eccles matter, which was settled privately but did not preclude future criminal referral. Sandra looked at Kevin. Kevin was staring at the floor. Kevin, she said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was entirely gone. What was underneath it was cold and hard and nothing like love. Kevin, this is your mother. She's trying to destroy us. Are you going to let her? Don't, Kevin said quietly. Don't what? She set you up. She set us both up, after everything I've done. Sandra. His voice cracked. She's my mother. The silence after that was the loudest thing I had ever heard. 2 of Reverend Morse's deacons watched Sandra. I watched her understand, gradually, that she was being escorted to the front porch, where a Columbus police officer I had quietly arranged to be present was waiting. There was no drama in it. There was only the soft click of my front door closing behind her. I stood in the middle of my living room with 22 people looking at me. I have one more thing to say, I said, and I need to say it to my son. Kevin was still standing by the fireplace. His face was doing something complicated and raw that I recognized. It was the face of a man who has understood, all at once, how much he has lost and how long he has been losing it. 12 years ago, I said, you asked me for $75,000 and I said no, and I was right to say no, and I would say no again. But Kevin, you were grieving your father and you were 28, and you were listening to a woman who had already decided what she wanted from you. And I let my hurt keep me from reaching back. That was my failure, and I own it. I walked to him. He looked like he might fall over. I'm not asking you to be the son you should have been, I said. I'm asking you to be the man you can still become. Because Marcus needs his father. And I stopped for a moment. I would like my son back, if there's anything left to work with. Kevin did not say anything. He pulled me into his arms and he held on the way a drowning person holds on, all the way from the center of himself, and I let him. In the chair by the bookshelf, Marcus had his face turned toward the window. But his shoulders were shaking, and when he finally looked over, his eyes were red, and he was smiling. There are things I want you to know about what came after, because the story does not end with justice. Justice is not an ending, it is a beginning of something harder and better. Sandra Pruitt was charged with fraud, elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy. Given her prior history in Michigan and the documentation Janet had assembled, the prosecution was straightforward. She accepted a plea agreement in the spring. She is currently serving a 4-year sentence. I did not attend the sentencing, but Rosalind Eccles did, and she told me she read a victim impact statement that made the prosecutor cry. Kevin had his own accounting to do, and I insisted on it, not because I wanted to punish him, but because a man who doesn't face what he's done will keep doing it. He had debt, credit cards, a personal loan Sandra had persuaded him to take out in his name, totaling a little over $28,000. I did not pay it for him. I helped him make a realistic plan to pay it himself, month by month, over 3 years. He works for a medical equipment distributor now, a smaller company than his previous positions, but honest work, and he is good at it because he understands the product in a way that comes from being raised by the woman who used it. He lives in a rental apartment 15 minutes from my house. He has dinner here on Sundays. Some weeks it is easy and some weeks it is awkward and all of it is real, which is more than I had before. Marcus turned 16 in February and got his learner's permit on his birthday. I took him to an empty parking lot and let him drive my car in slow circles until he stopped white-knuckling the steering wheel. He wants to study medicine. I told him I would help him with the application essays when the time came. He comes over on Wednesdays to help me in the garden, and we talk, and sometimes we don't talk at all, and both are good. I still volunteer at the free clinic. I still travel when I can. I still make biscuits on Saturday mornings and eat them on my porch with coffee, looking out at the garden and the creek and the particular quality of Ohio light in the early morning that I have never seen anywhere else. I am 68 years old. I live alone in my 4-bedroom house in Dublin, Ohio, and on certain evenings the rooms still echo, but they echo differently now. They echo the way a house does when it knows people are coming back. People make the mistake of thinking that age makes a woman soft. They see gray hair and reading glasses and a woman who says sweetheart to teenagers, and they think, easy. They think, vulnerable. They think, she won't see it coming. What they don't understand is that a woman who has spent 40 years in medicine, who has built a life from nothing, who has survived the death of her husband and the abandonment of her child, and the slow, ordinary grief of being invisible in a world that prefers you younger, does not need to be loud or angry or fast. She needs to be patient. She needs to be precise. She needs to understand, at the cellular level, the difference between what a person shows you and what they are. I knew what Sandra Pruitt was the moment she walked into my entryway and her eyes went to the watercolor before they went to my face. She thought she was walking into a trap she had set. She did not understand that I had been building mine since the morning Marcus knocked on my door with mud on his sneakers, and Robert's forehead and more courage than most adults I have ever met. If you are out there and someone has counted you out because you are old, because you are alone, because you are quiet, because they looked at you and decided you were finished, I want you to hear me. Don't get loud. Get ready. Document everything. Trust the people who come to you in honesty. And remember that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who has nothing left to prove and everything left to protect. My name is Eleanor Grace Matthews. I am 68 years old, and I am just getting started.